I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The change was almost invisible at first. A name removed from a restricted palace record, a responsibility transferred behind closed doors, and one devastating message delivered before the mourning had properly begun. But inside the royal household, everyone understood what it meant. Queen Camilla had officially been stripped of any named connection to Diana's private archive, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been asked to step into the space left behind. This was no routine administrative correction. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had already seen the decision before Catherine received her copy, and that detail mattered. Diana's private archive was not an ordinary palace collection. It was a restricted body of correspondence, photographs, recorded memories, household notes, and sensitive material kept apart from royal records because its contents touched intimate parts of Diana's life. For William and Harry, that made every decision about access more than administrative. It was about their mother's voice, her privacy, and who had the right to stand near it. Charles III received the finalized notification alone, with an aide waiting near the doorway. He read the page once, then again, and placed it flat on the desk without speaking. The palace had officially removed Camilla's name from every internal access and oversight designation linked to Diana's archive, while Catherine was given a supervisory role over its future handling. The king understood the danger. The order affected his wife, but it also touched a legacy that still shaped both of his sons. Catherine reacted with none of the satisfaction some might have expected. She grew visibly uneasy as she understood what the appointment represented. The role was not a prize. It placed her beside one of the most emotionally charged legacies in the family, and William's connection to that legacy made every choice heavier. She knew one careless step could make respect look like replacement, and she wanted no part of that. Then one sentence inside the order changed the atmosphere completely. Diana's archive, it stated, must remain under stewardship that was free from personal historical conflict. Those words turned a procedural change into something personal. William closed the folder after reading them, looked toward the window, and asked only, "Does Camilla know?" She did. And the moment Camilla understood that Catherine was not merely taking over a palace duty, but stepping into the exact role from which she had. Because removing Camilla's name was only the official act, understanding why Catherine's name appeared in its place meant entering a much older and far more painful triangle. For Catherine, this was never simply an archive. For William, it was never simply his mother's belongings. And for Camilla, the removal carried a meaning no palace statement could soften. 3 women, one gone, one carrying the crown beside Charles, and one preparing for a future queenship, had suddenly been connected through the most sensitive part of Diana's surviving legacy. Behind the formal language lay grief, memory, marriage, guilt, and an impossible question of belonging. Catherine understood why the decision felt heavier than an ordinary royal duty. For years, she had stood beside William, as trusted to protect the emotional world of their children, while keeping Diana's place inside the family untouched. A future queenship, meaning the role expected of the wife of a future king, carried public weight, but this responsibility was painfully private. William knew that distinction mattered, because his mother's memory was not ceremonial property. It was family. William spoke to Catherine quietly after the decision reached them. She told him she did not want the appointment to look like a victory over Camilla, or like one woman had been elevated by another woman's humiliation. The prince answered without hesitation, this was not about winning. It was about dignity. He trusted her because she understood that Diana's private life should never become a tool for settling old scores, polishing reputations, or reopening wounds their children had inherited. Camilla received the same reality in silence. She removed her glasses, left the official note beside an untouched cup of tea, and asked a senior aide whether Charles had personally approved Catherine's appointment. The aide hesitated. That pause told the queen consort everything before the answer came. Yes, the king had approved it. For her, the pain was not only exclusion, it was knowing Charles had accepted the judgment that her name could no longer remain attached to Diana's sensitive legacy. Catherine nearly stepped away. She considered asking that a neutral archivist, an independent professional responsible for preserving historical records, take the role. William stopped her. He admitted that he had supported her involvement from the beginning because he trusted her restraint more than anyone else's where Diana was concerned. Charles, meanwhile, had resisted the transfer until a tense family discussion made one truth impossible to ignore. Keeping Camilla connected to the archive was becoming harder to defend inside the family itself. Then William mentioned the moment he had never forgotten. Months earlier, one private request concerning Diana's personal material had changed everything. Catherine heard the strain in his voice, and suddenly, the decision no longer felt recent. And once that forgotten request is reconstructed, the removal of Camilla's name stops looking sudden and begins to look almost inevitable. Every palace rupture has a moment people later identify as the beginning. In this case, it was not a shouting match or a public scandal. It happened quietly, during a private archive review at Windsor, when a request was made concerning one of Diana's most personal collections. Nobody raised their voice, no door slammed. Yet William left that room convinced that a boundary had been crossed, and from that afternoon onward, Camilla's connection to the archive was living on borrowed time. William had accepted the need for those reviews. A controlled preservation review was a formal check used to decide which fragile photographs, recordings, letters, and handwritten pages needed professional conservation. Senior household officials could oversee the process, and the prince had tolerated that structure. But anything carrying Diana's private voice remained different to him. Her words were not historical material. They were pieces of a mother he had lost, and deeply personal to him. Camilla changed the temperature of the room with one request. During that Windsor review, she asked whether a selection of Diana's handwritten correspondence could be examined so future royal researchers might understand the historical context around certain events. The Queen Consort framed it as institutional caution, not personal curiosity. William stiffened immediately. He told her he was not accusing her of malicious intent, but Diana's private writings were not material to be contextualized by people whose lives were tied to her unhappiness. Camilla felt the rebuke land with only 4 people present. She insisted she was speaking from an institutional perspective and had no wish to rewrite anyone's story. William answered that some institutional questions stop being neutral the moment Diana's name is involved. The prince did not shout. That made the exchange worse. His restraint told her this was not anger passing through the room. It was a boundary being drawn. Catherine learned only later, through William's private account, that he had formally requested a review of Camilla's archive designation that same evening. He had kept it from her because he refused to place his wife between his grief and his father's marriage. Charles initially resisted any change, fearing that removing the Queen Consort would look punitive rather than protective. The king allowed the review to stall, hoping time would cool the tension. Then a second internal concern brought William's objection back to life. Charles could no longer avoid it, and Camilla could no longer treat the issue as administrative. She demanded a face-to-face answer. Had the prince decided she would never escape Diana's shadow? What had begun as a question about access was about to become something far more painful. A confrontation over memory, legitimacy, and whether forgiveness has limits. The room was small enough that nobody could hide behind ceremony. William stood near the fireplace. Camilla remained beside a chair she never sat in. Charles watched from between them as years of carefully managed history suddenly became impossible to contain. Camilla wanted one answer. Was this really about archival procedure, or had William decided that anything connected to Diana would forever be closed to her? His reply was quiet, almost painfully controlled, and it changed the direction of the meeting. Charles had called them together before any final decision was made, because he still believed the argument could be contained inside the family. A formal authority review, meaning a structured palace process used to decide who has responsibility over sensitive royal material, had not yet taken control. The king wanted William and Camilla to settle the issue without signatures, committees, or permanent consequences. Catherine was deliberately kept away. The prince refused to place his wife inside a dispute that belonged to his mother's memory. Camilla finally broke the silence. "Will I always be judged against her?" she asked. William did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice remained steady. He told the queen consort this was not about punishment or comparison. Diana's private voice could never be separated from the history involving Diana, Charles, and Camilla. That history was not abstract to him. It was part of his childhood, his grief, and the reason certain boundaries could not simply be erased by time. William pushed further, and Charles visibly tightened. The prince said his mother's most personal material could never become a place where anyone felt compelled to explain the past, soften it, balance it, or make it easier to live with. The king heard more than an argument about archives. He heard pain that had survived for decades. Camilla heard something different, a warning that good intentions might never be enough to free her from the shadow of what came before. Camilla insisted the disputed request had been misunderstood. She told William she had never intended to alter Diana's legacy or reshape her story. He accepted that possibility, but he did not move. Intent, he said, was not the same as suitability. A conflict of interest could exist, even when nobody meant harm, and that distinction left the queen consort with little room to answer. Charles then did what Camilla had not expected. He stopped defending her continued involvement. The king told her that even the appearance of personal conflict now threatened trust inside the family. Then he stood and ended the argument. The decision would no longer rest on emotion. A formal review would decide who controlled Diana's private material. That sentence shifted the battle away from family emotion and toward the small circle of people whose signatures could turn private discomfort into permanent royal policy. Royal power is often most dramatic when nobody raises their voice. Behind one locked door, a handful of people examined the question that Charles could no longer solve as a husband, and William could no longer approach only as a son. Camilla's name would either remain attached to Diana's private archive or disappear from it completely. And at the center of that decision sat one uncomfortable principle: stewardship had to survive, even the appearance of personal conflict. Charles understood that the review was different from a private family argument. Palace stewardship, meaning the delegated responsibility to protect and manage sensitive royal material, did not give one person unlimited ownership over every item. Diana's archive was controlled through preservation rules, family wishes, and restricted access standards. That mattered because the decision could not simply be settled by rank. The question was suitability. Who could protect the material while keeping the confidence of Diana's sons and avoiding another battle over the past? Charles sat through the discussion with unusually little interruption. When Diana's name appeared in the formal recommendation, the king lowered his eyes and rubbed his thumb against the edge of his signet ring. He knew exactly what approval would mean. Removing Camilla would wound his wife deeply. Refusing to remove her, however, could tell William that protecting appearances mattered more than protecting his mother's privacy. The monarch had spent years balancing loyalty and memory. Now that balance had become impossible. Catherine's name entered the discussion quietly. She had not requested the role, and William had never presented her as a replacement for Diana. Preservation advisors supported her because she stood outside the original conflict between Charles, Camilla, and Diana, while still holding the trust of the next generation. The prince supported her for another reason. She understood how easily private grief could become public symbolism, and he believed she would resist using the archive for status. Catherine then placed a condition on her acceptance. She would supervise protection standards and decisions about access, but she would not personally read Diana's intimate correspondence unless preservation work made it absolutely necessary. That restraint changed the room. Her refusal to treat access as privilege became the strongest argument for giving her responsibility. Charles finally took the approval and signed it. There was no relief in the king, and no sense of victory anywhere around him. Within minutes, 2 messages left the room. One informed Catherine that the responsibility was hers. The other told Camilla that her connection to the archive had ended. The signatures were dry before the fallout began, and for Camilla, The first sign of her new reality came not through words, but through a locked door that no longer opened for her credentials. There are moments when power disappears with almost no sound. Camilla experienced hers at an archive corridor she had passed before without incident. An aide entered a new authorization code. A small indicator changed. Her previous designation was gone. Nothing dramatic happened. No guards blocked her path. No announcement echoed through the palace. But that quiet electronic refusal carried the force of a public rejection. For the first time, the decision was no longer theoretical. It had physically changed her place inside the institution. Camilla stayed composed while the aide confirmed what she already understood. The final order had triggered immediate changes across access lists, preservation correspondence, consultation groups, and oversight records. A consultation group, in simple terms, was the small circle allowed to advise on how sensitive material should be protected and reviewed. Her name had been removed from each layer. Catherine, meanwhile, had not been handed unlimited freedom. She had become the named family steward, working alongside professional preservation staff rather than above them. Camilla said almost nothing until she returned to her private sitting room. Then she closed the door and told the aide she wanted several minutes alone. The queen consort had spent years building a place beside Charles, but this decision had reduced one part of that position to a silent cancellation. Losing access was painful. Knowing another woman had been trusted where she had been judged unsuitable was worse. Charles entered later without staff. Camilla did not soften the question. She told the king the humiliation was not really about archives. It was about Catherine being chosen where she had been removed. He did not contradict her. When she asked whether William had demanded that specific replacement, the monarch answered carefully. The prince had supported Catherine strongly, but her own restrictions had persuaded the review panel. She had asked for less access, not more. Camilla absorbed that in silence. Catherine had gained responsibility by refusing privilege, and that truth made the decision harder to challenge. Then the queen consort surprised Charles. She would not appeal. She would not spend the next year fighting over Diana's papers, forcing William to defend his mother repeatedly. While the family reopened wounds everyone claimed they wanted healed. The king listened, and for the first time that day, his expression eased. Then another message arrived. Catherine wanted to speak with Camilla privately. No Charles, no William, no aides, no advisors. The request was simple, but its meaning was not. And in that unguarded conversation, the story finally stops being about who lost authority and becomes about what two women choose to do with the history handed to them. Catherine could have accepted the decision and said nothing. Instead, she crossed the palace corridor alone and asked for a conversation that neither protocol nor advisors could control. No Charles, no William, no secretaries taking notes. Just Catherine and Camilla, sitting opposite one another, with Diana's name hanging silently between them. What followed did not erase the past, and it did not make either woman comfortable. But it transformed the meaning of Catherine's appointment, and prevented the moment from becoming a personal humiliation masquerading as royal reform. Catherine understood the danger before either of them spoke. If she treated the transfer as a victory, then the dignity she had been trusted to protect would disappear immediately. The new stewardship role, meaning responsibility for safeguarding sensitive family material rather than owning it, carried moral weight as much as authority. Camilla expected a defense of the decision. Instead, the princess began by telling her plainly that she had never asked for the appointment and had no intention of using it to elevate herself. Catherine then said the one thing that cut through the tension. Diana belonged first to William and Harry as their mother, not to royal strategy, not to public symbolism, not to rivalry between women. Camilla softened, but only slightly. The queen consort admitted that losing the role still felt like an official judgment on decades of her life, as though every attempt she had made to build a different future had been reduced to one painful chapter from the past. Catherine did not argue with that pain. She told Camilla she could not undo history, and she would never pretend it was uncomplicated. But she also refused to turn Diana's memory into a weapon. The princess explained the limits she had placed on herself. No casual reading of private correspondence, No personal use of intimate material, no selective release for image management, and direct consultation with William and Harry whenever anything exceptionally sensitive required attention. She wanted protection, not possession. Camilla listened, then offered an answer Catherine had not expected. She said the princess might be the only person whose appointment could end the dispute without making Diana's archive look like territory in a family war. The queen consort still felt wounded, but she understood the difference between replacement and restraint. Their understanding remained private. Outside those walls, none of the nuance would survive. The palace would announce the structural change, and the world would see only one explosive fact. Camilla was out, and Catherine was in. Within hours, a decision handled in whispers inside royal walls became a global headline, and one image outside Kensington Palace captured exactly how the public understood it. By midday, the quiet language of palace administration had vanished beneath enormous headlines. Broadcasters spoke of legacy. Newspapers printed side-by-side photographs of Diana, Camilla, and Catherine, and crowds began treating a private archive decision as something much larger, a judgment about memory itself. Yet among all the commentary, one moment outside Kensington Palace captured the mood more powerfully than any panel discussion. A woman placing white flowers beside Diana's memorial gate while holding a photograph of Catherine. The palace confirmed the new arrangement carefully, emphasizing preservation, privacy, and long-term protection rather than the conversations that produced it. Stewardship, meaning responsibility for safeguarding sensitive material without owning it, became the official language of the day. But that caution could not control the story. Catherine's appointment was linked to William, her future place within the monarchy, and the emotional connection many people already drew between her and Diana. The princess understood how quickly protection could be turned into symbolism. William watched the television coverage only briefly before switching it off. The prince disliked seeing his mother's private archive transformed into entertainment. Catherine noticed his discomfort and told him that becoming public news did not give anyone permission to turn Diana's memory into theater. He agreed, but the intensity unsettled him. What had begun as a family boundary was now being interpreted by millions as a verdict on the past. Camilla felt that verdict sharply. She opened a newspaper and found the words, "Diana Archive, Catherine steps in," dominating the front page, while her removal appeared beneath it like an afterthought. The queen consort folded the paper without comment and asked that the remaining copies be taken away. She had already accepted the decision privately, but public judgment was different. One headline had compressed years of complicated history into winners and losers. Outside Kensington Palace, the emotion became impossible to contain. A small gathering formed near the place associated with Diana's memory, and one woman placed white roses beneath a photograph of Diana and Catherine. Cameras captured the moment. By evening, broadcasters were repeating the image as shorthand for continuity, grief, and change. The symbolism was powerful, precisely because nobody had planned it. Catherine refused to feed the triumph. She authorized a restrained palace statement, making clear that her role was about protection, not ownership, and the tone of later coverage softened. Still, one conversation remained. The princess knew she could not fully accept the responsibility until William heard, privately and directly, what she intended to protect, and what she refused to become. The public had already written its verdict, but the only verdict that mattered to Catherine was waiting in a quiet room with Diana's eldest son. The final moment contains no announcement, no cameras, and no applause. Catherine places the new archive briefing on the table between herself and William and tells him something he has needed to hear from the beginning. She will protect his mother's private history, but she will never pretend to inherit Diana's place. William does not answer immediately. Then the tension that has followed the family through every argument, every signature, and every headline finally gives way to something quieter: relief. Catherine formally accepts the supervisory role under the limits she had already demanded. Professional archivists, meaning trained specialists responsible for preserving fragile historical records, will handle conservation work, while deeply personal material, remains protected from casual access or image making. The princess wants no symbolic ownership. William understands why that matters. For him, the decision finally creates a clear boundary between Diana's private memory and the unresolved history involving Charles and Camilla. His mother's words can remain hers, without being pulled back into old battles. Catherine looks at William and says the sentence that settles everything. "Your mother does not need replacing. She needs respecting." The prince reaches across the table and takes her hand. He tells her that this is exactly why he trusted her with the responsibility. She had not tried to become Diana, compete with Diana, or use Diana's legacy to strengthen her own place. For William, that restraint turns the appointment from a royal decision into something deeply personal. Protection without possession. Charles speaks privately with Camilla later that evening. The king acknowledges that approving her removal caused real pain, and he does not try to soften it. Camilla answers with equal honesty. She admits that fighting the decision would only chain their marriage more tightly to a past neither of them can rewrite. The queen consort chooses not to seek reconsideration, while the monarch accepts that some boundaries cannot be erased by title, marriage, or rank. The final meaning becomes impossible to miss. Catherine refuses to turn stewardship into status. Camilla accepts a limit she cannot change. Charles chooses family trust over appearances, and William finally sees his mother's archive placed under rules he can believe in. This was never truly about one woman defeating another. It was about removing Diana's private legacy from the emotional conflict that had surrounded her for decades. And that is what made this royal shakeup so powerful. Camilla lost a name on a file. Catherine gained a responsibility she never sought, and Diana's memory emerged not as a weapon between them, but as a private legacy finally given the distance, dignity, and protection it deserved. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.